Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Dexter. This video is where I give an in-depth review of Dexter, so I have to give a spoiler warning for the entire series of Dexter. If you haven't seen all of Dexter, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So I hold Dexter as one of the few examples of a cop show that I really love, although some may not even classify Dexter as a cop show because it very loosely fits that genre, which is probably why I like it so much, as I don't go for shows that neatly fit a specific tired genre, be it cop show, hospital show, or courtroom show, because Dexter is kind of an anti-cop show because its main protagonist, or anti-hero depending on how you look at it, is a serial killer. However, in addition to being a serial killer, Dexter also works at a police station in the forensic department, meaning most of the main characters in the show are detectives or cops, so I consider it a cop show, as most of the episodes are about solving crimes, albeit Dexter usually solves the crimes by killing the suspect without the police knowing about it. So the idea to have a show that follows a serial killer rather than a detective that hunts serial killers, so you can get it from his perspective. But the problem then becomes, if someone goes around killing people, the audience isn't going to like him. So they gave him a twist. He has a code that only allows him to kill killers, and after he has proven beyond a doubt that they are killers, and thus he takes care of the people who slip through the cracks of the system. Not always, though. Sometimes he takes care of them before the system is even aware of them. So, in fact, he's a vigilante. He's almost no different than a superhero in that regard, but of course this show plays him a lot darker than that, as he's just a typical serial killer who has the need to kill, but he was raised by his foster dad, who was a cop, to live by a code that, one, helped him never to get caught, and two, only to kill people who deserve it, never innocents. Now, I don't know much about psychology, but anybody who does will tell you that this show is not at all accurate in its portrayal as Dexter, who is just born to be a serial killer, and it's in his nature, and nothing he can do will change that. Anyone who knows anything about psychology will tell you this is oversimplifying the matter, which is much more complicated than that. This seems to address the nature versus nurture argument. I've always been one to say answer lies in between, and is usually a combination of both, whereas the show completely sides with nature, saying it's in his DNA and nothing he can do about it, which I don't really buy. But ultimately, who cares? It's just a fictional show, so I just go with it and accept this show's flawed premise as reality and have fun with it, and indeed it is a really great show. However, unfortunately, Dexter is one of those shows that overstayed its welcome and stayed on for far too long, past the point of it being good. Shows like Breaking Bad knew when to stop while they were still good, but Dexter didn't know when to stop and just kept going long after they had jumped the shark. Now, most people will tell you only the first 4 seasons are worth watching. You should give up after season 4. I, however, very strongly disagree and say only the first 5 seasons are worth watching, and you should give up after season 5, as I think season 5 is a really good season, one of the best of the entire series. However, I agree seasons 6, 7, and 8 really dipped in quality and are subpar to the previous seasons, which I'll get more into later. Dexter follows a format somewhat similar to 24, where each season tells one story, so when the next season starts it's a different story, but it keeps continuity much better than 24 did, and you do get the feel that Dexter is one long continuous story like shows like Breaking Bad and Lost, but its seasons are also more standalone. Each season has a different master serial killer it focuses on. Season 1 was the Ice Truck Killer, Season 2 was the Bay Harbor Butcher, Season 3 was the Skinner, Season 4 was the Trinity Killer, Season 5 was the Barrel Girl Gang, Season 6 was the Doomsday Killers, Season 7 was Isaac Serco and Hannah McKay, and Season 8 was the Brain Surgeon. Of course, there are some caveats, as Season 2, the Bay Harbor Butcher refers to Dexter himself as the FBI were honing in on him, so he wasn't the antagonist of the season. The season didn't really have an up-and-up antagonist unless you count Lila, who kind of became the antagonist towards the end. And Season 3 was more focused on Miguel Prada and his partnership with Dexter that ended badly, and the Skinner was just in the background. And Season 7, you'll notice, is the only one where the killer didn't have a fancy name, as Isaac Serco was more of a hitman or a gangster than a serial killer, and Hannah McKay was kind of sort of an antagonist. It was a bit complicated, but she definitely wasn't one in Season 8. Season 1 of Dexter is based off the novel Darkly Dreaming Dexter, which the show draws its premise from and loosely follows in Season 1. However, after Season 1, the show goes in an entirely different direction from the novels and goes its own path, becoming a totally separate entity. I have heard some say the novels take more of a supernatural turn. I wouldn't know because I never read them, but the show does stick more to a somewhat realistic portrayal. So now let me go season by season to give my opinion on each season of Dexter, starting with Season 1. Season 1 is a great introduction to the show. It does a great job of immediately setting the scene and putting you inside Dexter's head where you see things from his perspective. The voiceover narration that would become a signature of the show is really effective in helping you see things through the perspective of a serial killer. Throughout the season, you get more flashbacks from Dexter's childhood where you learn how he was raised to channel his homicidal tendencies. However, Season 1, more than any other season, has the most standalone episodes. Sure, there's the overall story of the ice truck killer, but that's kind of just in the background, and each episode tends to do its own thing until towards the end of the season when it's hyper-focused on that storyline. The character of Brian Moser, or Rudy, is kind of fake. As soon as the audience learns he's the ice truck killer, he all of a sudden starts acting more creepy. It was like before we knew he was the ice truck killer, he's the sweetest guy in the world, but now we know that he's a serial killer, he's a total creeper. Anyway, the ending of how Dexter was forced to choose between his blood brother and his adopted sister was a good character drama, as you could see through the season his sociopathic tendencies asserting themselves, as he thought the ice truck killer was just having a fun game with him. It wasn't until it affected his own sister that he started to see the seriousness of it all. So my rating for Season 1 out of 10 is a 9 excellent. Many people say Season 1 was the best season. I don't quite agree with that, but it was definitely a great high quality season. So next is Season 2, which had a really slow start that dealt with Dexter having to lay low because Dokes was following him everywhere because of the confrontation they had in the Season 1 finale. So it took Season 2 a little while to get started, but once the plot kicked in, it got really exciting, as Dexter's treasure trove of bodies he had been dumping in the sea had been discovered, and a manhunt began, led by FBI agent Frank Lundy, who led a joint task force which included Dexter's sister Deborah and his friend Angel. So Dexter was put in the strange position of hunting himself. Meanwhile, Dokes was getting more and more suspicious of him. I absolutely positively love this storyline. To me, it was far more interesting than the ice truck killer storyline, and way more intense, as Dexter was in constant danger of being discovered. I loved how he would do things to throw them off his trail, like the time he mailed a fake manifesto from the Bay Harbor Butcher that was basically a bunch of nonsense that just fucking with them, but that ended up backfiring on him when Lundy eventually saw through it and deduced that the Bay Harbor Butcher was involved in law enforcement, which led him to start looking at their own. Which eventually led to a point where Dexter was sure he was discovered, and they even tried to trick you to make you think that was the case, but instead they were convinced it was Dokes, who by this point knew it was Dexter and was trying to collect proof. I cannot say enough good things about this storyline. Personally, I think this was the show at the height of what it could do. However, Season 2 also featured a storyline about Dexter having to go to NA meetings and meeting a crazy woman Lila, with whom he had an affair with and would eventually leave Rita for, until she starts to become a psycho obsessed with Dexter. I wasn't a huge fan of this storyline, but it did get more interesting towards the end. First of all, the whole thing about Rita thinking Dexter was an addict was stupid. When Dokes followed Dexter to a meeting and thought he was an addict, all he had to do was talk to Deborah to find out that that wasn't the case. Rita talks to Deborah often, so you think the same thing would happen with her. Plus, this makes Rita come off as really simplistic. If she really lived with an addict for so many years, she'd be able to tell Dexter has no signs of drug addiction or withdrawals whatsoever. So that part was kind of stupid and just there to introduce Lila. And when they first introduced her, it was obvious they were going to have a fling. That being said, she was a uniquely strange character, and I bought that Dexter would fall for her being strange himself. But I liked the resolution that she ended up being a psycho that tried to control his every move and ultimately tried to kill him and Rita's kids, meaning he's better off staying with someone more normal like Rita. And I like how these storylines intersected at the end, with Lila being the one that killed Dokes. That was a nice twist. So my rating for season 2 is a 10, the best. An absolute amazing season. It had a few drawbacks, but what season doesn't? The ultimate storyline of Dexter being in the position of hunting himself and under constant threat of being discovered was amazing, and all the side plots were interwoven into this perfectly, making this a great season. So next we get into season 3, which tries to follow up season 2 but doesn't quite pull that off. Season 3 is mostly about Dexter trying to find a friend and a partner in crime, someone who understands him, as the whole time he felt alone. It was comforting for him to have someone who understands him. When District Attorney Miguel Prada discovers Dexter killing someone who he believes had killed his brother, he ends up getting involved with Dexter's activities and soon learns what kind of person he is. And Dexter eventually teaches him how to kill. But this eventually backfires on him as Miguel starts to disregard the code and kill innocent people for his own purposes, and of course turns on Dexter because he's not okay with this. In the meantime, there's a serial killer who skins people alive called the Skinner, going around killing people. Now, that storyline in particular with the Skinner I found really boring. The entire season he was looking for some dude who was killed in the very first episode of the season, so it was kind of boring. He's probably the least interesting main villain the show has ever had. The storyline with Miguel Prada was a bit more interesting, but again, here's a case of a guy was acting perfectly normal until the audience finds out he's a villain, and then all of a sudden he's twirling his mustache. The ending was tense, save for the final episode, which was anticlimactic, but the episodes leading up to it, where LaGuardia was on to Miguel, was pretty interesting. A lot of side plots this season. Deborah has a fling with an informant. That's alright, I guess. We're introduced to a new detective, Quinn, who takes Dokes' place. He's alright, I guess. And then Rita finds out she's pregnant, which leads to marriage. And this was the first season where Dexter started talking to his dead father through visions or whatever. I guess this was a good move, as I was getting sick of those flashbacks that were in the first 2 seasons. And I suppose they had to keep that actor who played Dexter's dad in the show. I guess this is okay, but it would become a bit tired later on. So my rating for season 3 is a 7, very good. This was a good quality season, however it wasn't that great. It was a slight dip in quality compared to the first 2 seasons. Don't get me wrong, it was interesting though, and throughout had a few exciting moments, but it was never anything that special. So next we get to season 4, which was another season with a really slow start, but once the story kicked in, it got really awesome. Season 4 started out following Dexter having to adjust to family life, being a father of a newborn and taking care of his 2 stepchildren and keeping his wife happy while trying to balance his job and his serial killer activities. This is a bit funny at first, if not a tad absurd, with him constantly falling asleep. sleep, but it goes flat out ridiculous with this dumb episode about the neighborhood watch. However, once the main storyline with the Trinity Killer kicks in, it gets really good. For the first time, we follow the serial killer, the Trinity Killer, from his perspective in this truly disturbing and creepy scenes as the Trinity Killer, played brilliantly by John Lithgow, goes around killing without remorse. Eventually, Dexter learns who he is, but is intrigued to discover he is a family man. So instead of killing him, he tries to learn how he successfully balanced his killer life with his family life. So this was a very intriguing plot that explored Dexter's weakness and his desire to be normal. What I really loved about this season is that in the first season, Dexter talked a lot about how he faked emotions and Rita was nothing more than a front. However, by now he has developed true feelings for her and the children, and I totally bought this transformation. Moreover, I think it makes him a more interesting character. However, his imaginary father tries to warn him it's his weakness, which unfortunately he's ultimately right, as the season ends in the most heartbreaking, most shocking way I've ever seen in any show ever, when Dexter finally catches up to the Trinity Killer and kills him, but comes home to discover he was too late, as he had killed Rita before Dexter caught up to him. That scene was just so crushing. I've never ever been as emotionally affected by a film, TV show, or book before or since. That was more emotional than The Red Wedding or Breaking Bad's Ozymandias episode. I mean, just the way they led up to Rita's death by having them plan on going this romantic getaway after Dexter learns how much he really cares about her, and, you know, to go home and discover her murdered. It was basically his fault for leading Arthur Mitchell to his house, and because he didn't kill him earlier. It was the single most depressing moment in all of television. The side plot this season were pretty good as well. One with Quinn dating a reporter who kept squeezing him for information but turned out to be the Trinity Killer's daughter, and the one who killed Lundy. And the romance between LaGuerta and Angel was okay too, I guess. However, there were a couple of things this season I felt were a bit inconsistent, such as Arthur Mitchell's family. At first they seemed all happy and cheerful, then all of a sudden he was an abusive father and they were totally dysfunctional. I'm sorry, but that seemed totally inconsistent, and I do think that they changed their plan halfway through. And also Quinn's reporter girlfriend, I think they just made her Arthur Mitchell's daughter at the last minute because her storyline was boring and they needed to do something interesting with her. I don't think it really fit that well either. But those are just minor gripes. Overall, this season was amazing. So my rating for season 4 is a 10, the best. John Lithgow was absolutely amazing as the Trinity Killer and creepy as fuck. This was the most interesting game of cat and mouse Dexter had with an adversary on the entire show, and the character story of Dexter learning to be a family man was riveting, and the ending is the most heartbreaking ending you could possibly imagine, making this season truly great. So next is season 5, and as I alluded to earlier, I think it gets an undeserved bad rap. I think season 5 was exactly the season you needed to have after the heart-wrenching ending of season 4. The first 2 episodes of the season were exactly what you needed, as it dealt with the aftermath of Rita's death, as Dexter totally started to break down and fall apart. And then having to deal with Rita's children, who were, of course, decided and torn up by their mother's death. This was a really emotionally powerful story that they needed to have. However, when the plot did kick in, it was also just what the show needed, as Dexter stalks and kills a serial killer who kills women and dumps their bodies in barrels in the swamp. He finds a woman still alive in the guy's basement who had been tortured and raped and surely would have been killed. It at first leaves him in a conundrum on what to do with her, but eventually he gains her trust, and eventually she convinces him to help her track down the remaining men in the group responsible for torturing her and killing all those other women. This was an emotionally effective character story, as Dexter has to connect more with his human side to sympathize with this woman and what she went through. I know many people didn't like it because they felt he was just moving on to another woman too soon after Rita and just forgetting all about her, but I totally disagree, as the beginning of the season did an amazing job at expressing how much Rita's death affected him, and even when he did get with Lumen, it was very gradual and believable. Seeing Dexter eventually teach Lumen how to kill and having them go after the killers together was really rewarding and much more believable and interesting than his team up with Miguel in season 3. I liked how she didn't turn out to be just a bad guy or a burden to him, and that helping her was ultimately the right thing to do. Plus, a couple of episodes we got where Lumen helped Dexter reconcile with Aster, that was truly heartwarming and pulled off really well. And the last couple of episodes were really suspenseful and had me on the edge of my seat. So my rating for season 5 is a 9 excellent. I love this season, and contrary to the bad rap it gets, I think this was the perfect follow-up to season 4 and was at times emotionally powerful when it needed to be and edge of your seat suspenseful when it needed to be. The characters were interesting and believable, and it really made me feel for Dexter. Okay, so now there's season 6, which I totally agree with the general consensus on this season. There was a massive drop in quality this year. This season started out slow and never got any better. This season explored issues of religion, as the killer was a religious zealot going around killing people based on end-time prophecies. There was this stupid side plot with Mos Def playing the ex-con priest who Dexter befriends, who eventually dies, and Deborah becomes lieutenant, which is just weird, and she butts heads with Huerta constantly while her and Matthews butt heads. Then there's these pointless side plot about Mazuka's interns. My god, who cares? And then Nanny from the previous season suddenly disappears, and Angel's sister just pops up out of nowhere as Dexter's new nanny. But whatever. But the main storyline with the Doomsday Killers, pretty goddamn boring. I suppose it could be interesting at times, but yeah. Then you get this storyline with Dexter trying to help the assistant to the main killer, Dr. Geller, played by Admiral Edward James Olmos, was kind of a waste of time, because then you learn Admiral Adama never really existed and was just a figment of the assistant Travis's imagination. So Dexter had the real killer in his grasp the whole time. I mean, I didn't think it was that dumb, but it didn't impress me either. What was worse, though, was how as soon as the audience learns Adama's just a figment, he completely disappears, and all of a sudden Travis realizes he's the real Doomsday Killer, and all of a sudden has this massive character change. I mean, what? Come on! It does get a bit exciting, though, towards the end, with Dexter setting traps for him, and then Travis sends one of his minions on a suicide mission to release a deadly virus at the police station, but Dexter ends up thwarting that at the last second. That was really exciting, but the final episode got a bit ridiculous, again with Travis stealing Dexter's son and threatening to kill him. I mean, come on. But the final scene where Deborah finally catches Dexter in the act, that was truly shocking and a great cliffhanger. Probably the only decent thing about this season. So my rating for season 6 is a 3, very poor. This is where the show really started to come apart at the seams. It could be exciting at times, but overall it was either boring or ridiculous or both. So next is season 7, and I really wanted to like season 7, but I'm afraid to say overall it was just a total mess. It starts out really interesting with Deborah learning who Dexter truly is as she helps him destroy the evidence. At first she believes his lies, that it was just a one-off thing, but soon learns the truth that he is a serial killer and was in fact the Bay Harbor Butcher all along, and how that totally fucks up her worldview. And the beginning, the main plot was pretty exciting as Dexter kills a cop killer who turns out to be a part of a European crime syndicate, so he soon has a trained hitman determined to kill Dexter. So it starts out good with some promise, but then it just gets bogged down in all these ridiculous side plots, with Dexter seeing this prisoner kill himself who implicates his partner Hannah McKay as a serial killer. So Dexter goes off to kill her, but ends up having sex with her instead. I mean, seriously, that moment in when Dexter had her wrapped up all in plastic and ready to kill her, and then all of a sudden starts making out with her, is the single most cheesiest part of the entire show. I did not buy that at all. When I saw that, I was just like, oh, come on. And then the side plot with Quinn dating a stripper involved with mobsters, it's like, who the hell cares? And towards the end of the season, the whole story just fell apart. The writers didn't even seem to know what they were focusing on, and the story with the hitman had a horrible anticlimactic ending as he ends up just teaming up with Dexter against some other gangsters. It was such a flat ending. Then all of a sudden it just flipped to being about Hannah McKay trying to kill Deborah, which, by the way, I didn't buy Dexter's romance with her at all. Now, his romance with Lumen in season 5 totally bought and thought that was pulled off really well, as she was a well-developed character and it played right into his need for a connection. But this bullshit with Hannah McKay, oh, you're a serial killer, so I think you're hot. Come on. But we also got this side plot with LaGuerta discovering Dexter was the Bay Harbor Butcher, which was interesting and culminated in a final intense scene where Deborah was forced to choose between Dexter and LaGuerta, and she ended up choosing Dexter. That was good, but overall season 7 lacked focus and was just a total mess. So my rating for season 7 is a 5 average. There were some good, exciting bits here and there, mostly having to do with Deborah discovering who Dexter really is and LaGuerta hunting after him. But that shit with Hannah McKay was just dumb, and the side plot with the gangster just totally teetered out at the end. Ultimately, this season was just all over the place. So finally, we come to season 8, where we get a storyline about a killer who scoops out parts of people's brains and mails them to a criminal psychologist whom Dexter learns mentored his father and gave him the idea to tutor Dexter in the first place and helped create the code. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of that episode of Star Trek The Next Generation they had in the final season where Data meets this woman who claims to be his mother because she was Dr. Soon's wife and helped create him. I mean, sure, it's plausible, but it does seem to come out of nowhere. So too did this Dr. Vogel character. I mean, it makes sense that a police officer wouldn't be able to come up with something as complex as this code and would need help from a trained psychologist, but still, it just seems rather too convenient. I wasn't all that invested in her. I wasn't interested in the brain surgeon, and I most certainly wasn't invested in this stupid storyline with Dexter trying to train this teenage boy to be a killer, especially because it went nowhere. And then, oh look, Hannah McKay's back, yippee. And now she's got a complete and total character change. She no longer wants to kill Deborah, she wants to help her and live happily ever after with Dexter. I mean, seriously, is anyone buying this shit? And then you got this pointless storyline about Mazuka finding his daughter that bore absolutely no relevance to anything at all. I mean, really, who cares? And then the thing about Quinn trying to make Sergeant, again, who cares? Also, the brain surgeon was the least interesting serial killer adversary the show has ever had. There was absolutely nothing new or interesting about him. He was just another generic two-dimensional serial killer, a far cry from Lithgow's awesome and dynamic Arthur Mitchell of season 4. So, Dexter in the first 5 seasons had these character stories and riveting emotional stories about a sociopath trying to fit in and learn, and believable characters like Rita and Lumen for him to play off of. Here it just seemed completely devoid of emotion and believability. The storyline with Dr. Vogel was too on the nose, as they were just going over things they had already been over, like how Dexter learned to care for all the people that he loved, but this was just trying to spoon feed the audience that information instead of presenting it in creative and metaphorical ways like they've done before. You know what this season reminded me of? It reminded me of 24, because 24 was the show that lived long past its prime and ended up just repeating the same plot points over and over again. And that's exactly what season 8 was doing. It was just repeating beats that had already been done better in the past. Like the whole Hannah McKay thing. They already did a storyline with Dexter getting together with a weird killer chick with Lila, but this time it all works out in the end, which I thought was dumb. And the 24 analogy even holds for the god-awful finale. They did the exact same thing 24 did by having Dexter live in exile as a lumberjack while Hannah McKay raises his kid. I'm sorry, but that is some serious cop-out bullshit right there. Just like I said with 24, you either kill the main character or you have him live happily ever after. Those are the only two ways to do it. None of this exile cop-out bullshit. You know what it is? Just like 24, they're trying to do a spin-off series. So I think they purposely left it open for, so they could do a possible spin-off series. Come on, just leave it alone, people. You drove this story into the fucking ground. Just let it be. Quit beating a dead horse. The producer said that this was a fate worse than death for Dexter, and he should have a dark ending because he's a serial killer after all, and thought it would be sending the wrong message to have him live happily ever after. Personally, I think it would have been much more powerful to go against the grain and give Dexter a happy ending. To have a bad guy as twisted as him live happily ever after, that would sort of make people have to re-examine why they feel so good about this ending, and is it really a good thing after all? Not this lumberjack bullshit. Also, that ending with killing off Deborah in such a stupid way because, Dexter decided not to kill the brain surgeon and leave him for the police. I mean, come on, we already got a plot with Dexter losing a loved one because he didn't kill someone when he should have. I mean, it's just rehashing everything all over again. And Deborah's death was just pulled off so poorly. I wasn't emotionally affected by it at all. And I love the character of Deborah. They just did such a poor job at it at the end. So my rating for season 8 is a 2, extremely poor. It had a few interesting moments with Deborah going all dark after having to kill LaGuardia, but even that seemed to get shrugged off by the end. But overall, the show just lost all quality, and it just felt like an empty shell of what it once was. So my ranking of the seasons from my least favorite to my favorite are Season 8, Season 6, Season 7, Season 3, Season 1, Season 5, Season 2, and Season 4. Season 2 and 4 are neck and neck for my favorite as they were both amazing, but I think Lithgow gives Season 4 the slight edge as a truly amazing season. So in a hypothetical world where I suddenly am made king of Dexter and can decide what to do with it, here's what I would have done. Season 1 through 5 would play out exactly as they did, but Season 6 would have been the final season and would have combined what was Season 6, 7, and 8 into one season. Deborah would have discovered who Dexter really was at the end of Season 5 when she tracked him and Lumen down, so Season 6 would be about Deborah coming to terms with this, and Lumen would stick around for Season 6, so we'd get rid of that whole Hannah McKay thing, and we get a storyline of an interesting serial killer and focus on that instead of having it go all over the place, and have Dexter try to balance Deborah and his family life and eventually lose control of everything as LaGuardia hunts him down. And when the inevitable show-off comes between Dexter and LaGuardia, Deborah must choose. Dexter makes the choice for her and allows LaGuardia to kill him to spare his sister, sacrificing himself for her. Meanwhile, Lumen was poised to take Harrison and raise him. That's how I would have ended it, but that's just me. I know many may disagree, but even if you do, I think it should have ended at Season 6. I think we can all agree there. The show just went on for far too long. But overall, Dexter was an amazing show. that whose like you'll rarely see again, and was truly unique. So my rating for Dexter as a whole is a 9 excellent. It could have been a 10 had it not been for those last 3 subpar seasons, but even taking those into account, it's still an amazing show that was suspenseful, exciting, with rich characters you really got to know and love and care about, and could have some of the most intense moments of all of television, making this one of my favorite shows of all time. So that's it for my review on Dexter. Be sure to check out my channel for many more TV show reviews. I also did a top 10 episodes of Dexter, which you can check out as well. I'll put a link in the description below for that video. And if you're into Game of Thrones, I do many Game of Thrones videos, including season 6 prediction series I'm starting next week. So make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.